bronze bell explodes into the gray dawn, 3 long peals, 3 short, 3 long. The territorial distress code that every soul in Clear Creek knows means run now. Nathaniel Cordell stands at the base of the 30-foot bell tower, rain hammering his face, his hands gripping the rope so hard his knuckles bleed white. Below him, the creek has become a monster, a churning brown wall advancing at the speed of a galloping horse. He cannot climb the tower. His legs, 18 months post-accident, have barely regained enough strength to support his weight on level ground, let alone carry him up 30 feet of wet wooden rungs. But he has to, because Lily Ashford, 6 months pregnant with a child who will never know its biological father, is trapped a quarter-mile downstream with their infant daughter. "Climb, damn you," he whispers to his trembling legs. "She needs you. They need you." And he puts his boot on the first rung. The wood is slick with rain and moss. His right leg, the stronger one, takes his weight. His left, still mostly numb below the knee, dangles uselessly for a moment before he forces it to find purchase. Up 1 rung. His shoulders scream with the effort of pulling his dead weight. 2 rungs. 3. Behind him, Reverend Samuel Hayes shouts something, but the words are lost in the roar of approaching water. Nate does not look back. He cannot afford to. Every ounce of concentration must go to the next rung, the next breath, the next impossible movement upward. 4 rungs. 5. His left leg gives out completely. He hangs by his arms, boots scraping against wet wood, searching for the ladder. Pain shoots through his lower back, the old injury site where the stallion's hooves had shattered his spine against the corral fence. For a moment he is back there lying in the dirt, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching the sky spin above him while someone screams for a doctor. 6 rungs. 7. He finds the rung again, pulls, climbs. The tower sways in the wind, or maybe that is just his vision blurring from exertion. Below he can hear Hayes organizing the evacuation, shouting orders to families streaming toward high ground. But there are families trapped on the wrong side of the swelling creek. Families who will drown if someone does not coordinate the rescue from high enough to see the whole disaster unfolding. 8 rungs, 9, 10, halfway. His hands are bleeding now, torn open by splinters and the rope's rough fiber. He tastes copper in his mouth where he has bitten his tongue. Every muscle in his upper body burns with lactic acid, screaming for him to stop, to rest, to admit defeat. But somewhere downstream, Lily is holding their daughter Anna, watching the water rise around the farmhouse, wondering if her husband will come, wondering if anyone will come. 11 rungs. 12. 6 months earlier, Nate Cordell could not have climbed 3 rungs. 6 months earlier, he was a broken man in a wheelchair, accepting condolences from neighbors who spoke too loudly and too slowly, as if paralysis had somehow damaged his hearing and his mind. 6 months earlier, he had been alone. Then came Lily. The memory gives him strength for the next rung and the next. October 1873. The leaves had turned gold across the Dakota Territory, and the air carried that peculiar crispness that promised an early winter. Nate sat in the back pew of Clear Creek's only church, his wheelchair positioned carefully in the aisle where it would not block anyone's view of the altar. He had come early, as he always did, to avoid the awkward maneuvering required when the pews filled with families. The church was empty except for Reverend Samuel Hayes, who knelt at the altar in private prayer. Nate recognized the posture, the slumped shoulders, the way the man's hands gripped each other as if trying to hold something that kept slipping away. He had worn that same posture himself in the months after the accident, when he still believed prayer might change what the doctors had declared permanent. The Reverend finished, crossed himself, and stood. Only then did he notice Nate in the shadows. "You are early, Nathaniel." "Habit," Nate said. "Easier to get settled before the crowd." Hayes nodded, understanding in his weathered face. He was 48, his hair more gray than brown, his eyes holding the particular sadness of a man who had buried people he loved. He moved down the aisle and sat in the pew beside Nate's chair, not across from him, not looking down at him, but beside him as an equal. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Outside, a wagon rattled past, some family heading to market or visiting neighbors. Normal life, continuing its relentless march forward, while Nate remained frozen in his chair, frozen in time, frozen in the moment when everything had changed. "I need to ask you something," Hayes said finally. "Not as your reverend, but as someone who has walked through fire and knows what it costs." Nate waited. He had learned patience in the wheelchair, if nothing else. "There is a woman," Hayes continued, "Lily Ashford. Her husband Daniel died 4 months ago in the copper mine collapse. She is 6 months pregnant and has nowhere to go. The landlord wants his property back, and she has $17 to her name." Nate kept his eyes forward, watching dust motes dance in the colored light streaming through the stained glass windows. He knew where this was going. "She needs help," Hayes said, "and you need help. I am not proposing charity, Nathaniel. I am proposing a partnership. You want me to marry her. I want you both to have a chance at something better than slow starvation and loneliness." Nate laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the empty church. "What kind of chance am I? I cannot walk. I cannot work the land. I cannot even—" He stopped, swallowing the words he could not bring himself to say aloud. "You are more than your legs," Hayes said quietly. "I have watched you adapt to that chair like it was born to you. You have modified your entire cabin to function around your limitations. You run that small farm with systems and ingenuity that would put able-bodied men to shame. You are not helpless, Nathaniel. You are just alone, and she deserves better than a cripple." Hayes turned to look at him directly. "She deserves a roof over her head and food for her child. You deserve companionship and someone to help with the work you cannot manage alone. This is not about romance or pity. This is about two people surviving together instead of dying separately." Nate wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to his pride, his independence, his careful solitude. But the truth was that Hayes was right. The farm was slowly overwhelming him. There were tasks he simply could not accomplish from the chair, no matter how many pulleys and levers he installed. And the loneliness, though he would never admit it aloud, was a constant weight that pressed down on him like the sky itself. "When would this happen?" he asked. "Next Sunday, if you agree." "Does she know about this arrangement?" "I am speaking with her this afternoon." "But, Nathaniel, you should know, she is not looking for a savior. She is looking for a solution. Do not expect gratitude or affection. Expect honesty and hard work." "Fair enough." Hayes stood, placing a hand on Nate's shoulder. 10 years ago, my wife and son died of typhoid. I wanted to die with them. A stranger took me in, fed me, gave me purpose. I am paying that forward. Do not mistake this for charity. This is how we survive out here. Together. After the Reverend left, Nate sat alone in the church for another hour, watching the light change as the sun climbed higher. He thought about his cabin, carefully modified for a man in a wheelchair. He thought about the long winter ahead, the isolation, the slow grinding reality of managing a farm with only 2 functional limbs. He thought about what Hayes had said, "You are just alone." That afternoon he wheeled himself to the church office and told Hayes, yes. Sunday came cold and clear. Nate, dressed in his best shirt, the one his mother had sewn for him before she passed, and struggled into the vest that still fit despite the muscle mass he had lost in his legs and gained in his shoulders and arms. Around his waist he wore the belt with silver conchos that had been his father's, and attached to that belt were the spurs he had worn during his cavalry days, polished silver with intricate engravings that caught the light. They served no practical purpose now. He would never feel them against a horse's flanks again, never use them to communicate with an animal in that silent language of pressure and release. But they were part of who he had been, and he refused to completely surrender that identity. The church filled slowly. The permanent residents of Clear Creek, about 40 families, occupied the pews with the careful neutrality of people watching something they were not quite sure how to judge. Some faces showed pity. Others showed curiosity. A few showed the hard-eyed practicality of frontier folk who understood that survival sometimes required unconventional arrangements. Nate positioned his chair at the altar and waited. The door opened, and Lily Ashford entered. She was smaller than he had expected, barely 5 feet tall, her frame delicate except for the pronounced swell of her belly beneath a black wool dress that had been hastily altered to accommodate her pregnancy. Her hair, dark brown and pulled back in a simple bun, revealed a face that was more interesting than beautiful. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of river stone that met his gaze directly, without flinching, without the careful avoidance most people showed when they looked at a man in a wheelchair. She walked down the aisle alone, no family to give her away, no friends to stand with her, just a pregnant widow making a calculated decision to survive. When she reached the altar, she looked down at him, and he looked up at her, and something passed between them in that moment. Not attraction, not affection, but recognition. They were both people who had been broken by circumstances beyond their control, and they were both choosing to fight back in the only way available to them. Reverend Hayes began the ceremony. Nate barely heard the words. He was too focused on Lily's hand, resting lightly on his shoulder, not for affection, but because the weight of the child made standing for long periods difficult. Her fingers were work-roughened, the nails cut short and practical. These were hands that knew labor. Do you, Nathaniel Cordell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do. His voice came out steady, surprising him. He had expected it to crack, to betray the fear and uncertainty churning in his gut. But the words emerged calm and clear, a promise he intended to keep even if he did not fully understand what he was promising. Do you, Lily Marie Ashford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do. Her voice matched his, steady, certain. A contract being executed with full knowledge of its terms. The ring was simple gold, sized down by the town blacksmith to fit her slender finger. As Nate slipped it onto her hand, his fingers trembled slightly, but his touch was gentle. He had learned gentleness in the wheelchair, where every action required thought and care. By the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Hayes closed his Bible with a snap that echoed through the small church. You may kiss the bride. This was the moment Nate had been dreading. Lily looked down at him, her expression unreadable, and slowly bent forward. Their lips met briefly, formally, the kiss of strangers trying to be polite about an awkward situation. Her lips were dry and cool. The kiss lasted perhaps 2 seconds. The congregation applauded with perhaps too much enthusiasm, as if everyone was relieved the ceremony had proceeded without incident. The reception in the church hall was brief and awkward. People offered congratulations with the tone usually reserved for people facing uncertain medical procedures. The food was excellent, the conversation strained. Nate accepted well wishes and ignored the pitying glances. Lily stood beside his chair, one hand resting on the back, as if she had already grown accustomed to using him as support for her aching body. An hour later, they left in Nate's modified buckboard. The wagon had been carefully adapted for his use, the reins positioned within easy reach, the seat built to accommodate his chair, which could be locked into place. Lily sat beside him, silent, her hands folded over her belly. The ride to the farm took 20 minutes. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? They had made their bargain, signed their contract in front of God and witnesses. Now came the actual living of it. The cabin appeared as they crested the final rise. It sat on 5 acres of stubborn Dakota prairie, a simple 2-room structure with a stone chimney and a well that ran clear even in the driest summers. Nate had built it himself 7 years ago, back when his body answered to his commands, back when he could swing an axe and hoist logs and work until his muscles burned with exhaustion, that felt good, felt earned. Now it was modified, adapted, made functional for a man who lived at chair height. The door had been widened. A ramp led to the porch. Inside, Lily would find counters lowered, shelves repositioned, pathways cleared for the chair to move freely. "They mean well," Nate said as they pulled up to the cabin. His voice was rough from disuse. He had not spoken more than a few words all day. Lily looked at the wildflowers someone had placed in a mason jar on the porch, the fresh curtains hanging in the windows, the obvious signs that the Ladies' Aid Society had been here preparing the space. "It is lovely," she said. Her tone was neutral, neither pleased nor displeased. Assessing. Nate maneuvered his chair down from the buckboard using the pulley system he had rigged, then pulled the wheelchair up behind him. The whole process took less than a minute, performed with the smooth efficiency of long practice. He caught Lily watching, her expression thoughtful. Inside the cabin was exactly as he had left it, except cleaner and more feminine. Rugs covered the plank floors. The bed, usually pushed against one wall, had been positioned more centrally. Someone had left a nightgown on the pillow, obviously a gift from the Ladies' Aid Society. "The bedroom is yours," Nate said, gesturing to the main room's sleeping area. "I will take the settee." It was a modified piece of furniture, longer and wider than standard, designed to accommodate his body during the long nights when sleep refused to come and he would lie awake, cataloging everything he had lost. Lily nodded, accepting this arrangement without argument. She moved to the bedroom area, her movements careful and deliberate, one hand pressed against her lower back in the universal gesture of pregnant women everywhere. Nate busied himself with starting a fire in the hearth, though the evening was not particularly cold. He needed something to do with his hands, some task to occupy his mind while he adjusted to the presence of another person in his carefully ordered space. They ate the cold supper the ladies had left in near silence. Chicken, bread, preserves, simple food, well prepared. Lily ate with the focused intensity of someone who had recently known hunger. Nate found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, noting the fine bones of her wrists, the slight hollowness in her cheeks that spoke of meals skipped to save money. "When's the child due?" he asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "Late January, maybe early February. The doctor is not certain. And you are managing all right? With the pregnancy, I mean." It was the first personal question he had asked, and Lily considered her answer carefully. "Some days are harder than others. The baby is strong, active." "Takes after its father," Nate said, then immediately regretted the words. Reminding her of the dead husband seemed tactless, but Lily only nodded. Daniel was always moving, always working. He believed tomorrow would be better than today. Past tense, was. Believed. The markers of loss that Nate recognized in his own speech when he talked about the man he used to be. After supper, Lily excused herself to change into the nightgown. Nate transferred to the settee, arranging the blankets the way he preferred them. He heard the rustle of fabric from behind the privacy screen, the soft sounds of a woman preparing for bed. When she emerged, she looked younger somehow, vulnerable. The nightgown was new white cotton with tiny buttons, and it made her look like a girl playing dress-up rather than a woman of 25 who had buried a husband and was about to become a mother. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She climbed into the bed, arranged herself carefully around her belly, and within minutes her breathing had deepened into sleep. The exhaustion of pregnancy and stress finally catching up with her. Nate lay awake on the settee, listening to her breathe, adjusting to the presence of another person's sounds in his space. Outside, the wind sang through the prairie grass, the eternal song of the plains. Inside, a stranger who was now his wife slept in his bed, and Nate wondered what he had agreed to. He waited until he was certain Lily was deeply asleep. Then, moving as quietly as possible, he transferred from the settee to his wheelchair and rolled to the far corner of the cabin where he kept his exercise equipment. Dr. Elias Pruitt had given him specific instructions 3 months ago when the first signs of nerve regeneration had appeared. Small movements, gentle resistance, patience above all. Do not expect miracles, Pruitt had said, but do not give up hope either. Nate positioned himself carefully and began the exercises, flexing his right ankle, trying to move toes that sometimes obeyed and sometimes remained stubbornly still. The left side was worse, still mostly numb below the knee, but occasionally he could feel phantom sensations, like electricity running through dead wires. Tonight, perhaps because of the stress of the day, perhaps because of some random firing of healing nerves, his right foot moved. Not much. A slight flexing of the ankle, a curl of the toes, but movement. Definite, undeniable movement. He bit back a gasp of surprise and hope. Tried again. The foot moved again, sluggish and weak, but responsive. For 18 months he had been told he would never walk again. The injury was too severe, the damage too extensive. Accept it, they said, adapt and move on. But 3 months ago, sensation had begun returning, and 2 months ago, the first tiny movements. And now this. Not recovery, not yet. Maybe not ever, but possibility. The door that had been slammed shut was opening a crack, letting in a sliver of light. Nate sat in the darkness, his foot twitching at his command, and allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The first week of marriage passed in careful politeness. They orbited each other like planets, maintaining safe distances, communicating in brief sentences about practical matters. Lily took over the cooking, which came as a relief since Nate's meals had devolved into whatever could be prepared quickly and eaten without much thought. She cleaned and organized with the efficiency of a woman who had managed a household before. In return, Nate handled the farm work, moving through his modified routines with practiced ease. He had developed systems for everything, pulleys and levers that allowed him to feed livestock, repair fences, maintain equipment. It was slower than it would have been on 2 working legs, but it got done. Lily watched him work with undisguised interest. She did not offer help, seeming to understand that he needed to prove his competence, but she paid attention to his methods, learning the logic of his adaptations. On the 4th day, she found him in the barn, struggling to lift a hay bale to a height his arms could reach, but his position in the chair made difficult. "Would it help if I pushed from below while you pulled from above?" she asked. He wanted to refuse, wanted to insist he could manage alone. But the truth was, her help would make the task easier and faster. "Yes," he said, "thank you." They worked together, and the bale rose smoothly into place. A small thing, but it felt like progress. A crack in the wall of careful independence they had both erected. That evening, Lily sat in the rocking chair that had appeared sometime during the Ladies' Aid Society's preparations, her hands moving over a blanket she was knitting for the baby. The repetitive motion of the needles provided a soothing soundtrack to the crackling fire. Nate sat at his workbench, hands occupied with leather work. Before the accident, he had been an adequate leather worker, capable of basic repairs. Now, with time abundant and mobility limited, he had become skilled. His hands remembered the craft his father had tried to teach him years ago, back when Nate had been too eager to see what lay beyond the next hill to appreciate the value of patient craftsmanship. "You are quite good at that," Lily observed, watching him tool an intricate pattern into a belt blank. "My father was a master. He tried to teach me, but I was too impatient then. And now I have nothing but time." The words came out more bitter than he intended. Lily looked up from her knitting, her river-stone eyes studying his face. "Time is not nothing," she said quietly. "Time is the only thing we have that cannot be taken from us, only used poorly or well." Nate paused in his work. "That is surprisingly philosophical for someone knitting baby clothes. I had a lot of time to think after Daniel died. Too much time, maybe. You learn things about yourself when you are alone with your thoughts for months. What did you learn? That I am stronger than I believed. And weaker. that I can survive things I thought would kill me, that survival is not the same as living, but sometimes survival is enough. Nate set down his tools. Is that what this is for you? Survival? Lily considered the question, her needles never pausing in their rhythm. It started that way, she admitted, but I think it might become something else, if we let it. What do you want it to become? Partnership, friendship maybe. I am not asking for love, Nathaniel. I am too practical for that. But I would like to be more than two strangers sharing a roof. I would like that too. It was the most honest conversation they had shared since the wedding, and it shifted something between them, not dramatically but perceptibly, a small warming of the careful distance. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Nate performed his exercises with renewed dedication. The right leg was definitely improving. He could flex the ankle, curl the toes, and even generate a small amount of resistance against pressure. The left leg remained stubbornly unresponsive, but Dr. Pruitt had warned him that recovery, if it came at all, would be uneven and unpredictable. He was so focused on his efforts that he did not notice Lily watching from the bed until she spoke softly. "How long have you been doing that?" Nate froze, caught in the act of something he had intended to keep private. 3 months. Since sensation started returning. Lily sat up, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. She pushed aside the blankets and moved to where she could see him better. "Does Dr. Pruitt know? He is the one who taught me the exercises. He says recovery is possible, but not guaranteed. It could take years, or it might never happen fully. But you have movement now. I saw your foot flex." Nate looked down at his traitorous foot, which had given away his secret. A little. On the right side. "The left is still mostly dead. Why did you not tell me?" "Because I did not want you to hope, or to expect, or to be disappointed when this turns out to be as far as I get." Lily lowered herself carefully to sit on the floor beside his chair, her hand resting on her belly where the baby was apparently awake and active, judging by the movement visible beneath her nightgown. "I spent 4 months watching my husband die," she said. The mind collapse did not kill him instantly. It crushed his chest, and he drowned slowly in his own blood. I sat beside his bed and watched him fight for every breath, watched him hope he would recover, watched that hope die a little more each day. When he finally passed, part of me was relieved. Not because I did not love him, but because the hoping was finally over. I am sorry. I am telling you this because I understand the fear of hope. But Nathaniel, hope is not the enemy. False hope, maybe. But real hope, earned hope, the kind that comes from actual progress, that is worth the risk of disappointment. She reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on the wheel of his chair. "You do not have to hide this from me. Whatever happens, we face it together. That is what partnership means." Nate turned his hand over, palm up, and she laced her fingers through his. They sat like that for a long moment, connected by this small gesture that felt larger than its physical reality. The baby kicked, hard enough that Nate could feel the movement against his arm where Lily was pressed close. She laughed softly. "Someone is awake," she said. "May I?" Lily nodded, guiding his hand to the spot where the baby was most active. Under his palm, he felt the distinct roll of a tiny body, the push of what might have been a foot or an elbow. "Strong," he said. "Takes after its father." But this time, the reference to Daniel did not feel like an intrusion. It felt like Lily sharing a piece of her past, letting Nate into the complicated grief she carried. They talked for another hour, speaking in low voices so as not to break the intimate spell of the firelit cabin. Lily told him about Daniel, about the brief happiness of their marriage before the mind took him. Nate told her about the accident, about the cavalry scout days before it, about the slow, terrible process of accepting that his body would never again do what his mind commanded. When Lily finally returned to bed, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer strangers, not quite friends yet, but moving in that direction. Two people learning to trust each other with the broken pieces of their lives. Nate lay on the settee, staring at the ceiling beams he had hewn and raised himself in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling the windows, promising winter's approach. Indeed, his wife, because that was what she was now, slept peacefully. And in the corner, his traitorous foot twitched and flexed, practicing movement in the darkness, fighting against 18 months of stillness. He slept better that night than he had in months. The following week, Dr. Elias Pruitt made his scheduled visit. He arrived in the afternoon, his black medical bag worn smooth by decades of use, his face creased with the particular weariness of a man who had seen too much suffering. Pruitt was 60 years old, his hair white as fresh snow, his hands still steady despite their age. He had been an Army surgeon during the Civil War, had amputated limbs in battlefield tents, had held dying boys while they cried for their mothers, had made impossible decisions about who would receive the limited morphine and who would have to endure agony without relief. The war had marked him in ways both visible and invisible. He walked with a slight limp from an old injury, and his eyes held shadows that never quite disappeared. But his medical knowledge was beyond question, and his dedication to his patients absolute. "Nathaniel," he said, shaking Nate's hand with the firm grip of someone who treated wheelchair users as equals rather than invalids. "Mrs. Cordell." Lily nodded from where she sat shelling peas at the kitchen table. "Dr. Pruitt." "How is the pregnancy progressing?" "Well enough. The baby is active and growing." "Good. I will examine you before I leave, if that is acceptable. But first, let us see how our cavalry scout is healing." Nate wheeled to the bedroom area where Pruitt could conduct the examination in relative privacy. The doctor's hands were gentle but thorough, testing sensation, checking reflexes, measuring the range of motion in Nate's lower limbs. "Remarkable," Pruitt said finally, sitting back on his heels. "You have regained 40% sensation in the right leg, 30 in the left. The muscle tone is improving. The reflexes are returning. Nathaniel, this is unprecedented in my experience, so I might walk again?" "Might. With intensive therapy, you could be standing with support within 6 months, walking with assistance within a year. But I must stress, there are no guarantees. The spine is delicate and nerve damage is unpredictable. But there is hope. There is genuine, evidence-based hope." Yes. Nate felt something unclench in his chest, a fist that had been clenched tight for 18 months, finally loosening its grip. "What if I fail? What if this is as far as I get?" Pruitt looked at him with those war-weary eyes that had seen the worst humanity could inflict upon itself. "Then you fail. But Nathaniel, you have already survived what should have killed you. You have built a life from wreckage. If this recovery stops tomorrow, you are still more than you were. Do not let fear of failure prevent you from trying." After examining Lily and pronouncing both mother and baby healthy, Pruitt accepted a cup of coffee and sat at the table. His hands wrapped around the warm cup, but Nate noticed they trembled slightly. "Are you well, doctor?" Lily asked, her perceptive eyes missing nothing. Pruitt smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Old ghosts, Mrs. Cordell. They visit more frequently as I age. Nothing that concerns you." But later, as Nate walked him out to his wagon, Pruitt paused and looked back at the cabin. "You are building something good here," he said quietly. "Hold on to it. The darkness comes for all of us eventually. Having someone to stand with when it does, that makes all the difference. Is the darkness coming for you, Doctor?" "It never left. But I am managing. Helping you helps me." Strange as that may sound, it does not sound strange at all. After Pruitt left, Nate sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sun descend toward the western horizon. Inside, he could hear Lily moving about, preparing supper, humming softly to herself. The sound was oddly comforting, this evidence of life and normalcy. She joined him on the porch after a while, lowering herself carefully into the chair beside his. 40%, she said. "That is significant. It is something, maybe enough." They sat in companionable silence as the sky turned colors, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. The wind had died to a whisper, and in the stillness they could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the closer sounds of chickens settling for the night. "I have been thinking," Lily said, "about what happens when the baby comes, about what we are building here. And I think I would like this to be real, not just an arrangement, a real marriage, a real family." Nate turned to look at her, this woman who had come into his life as a stranger and was becoming something else, something more. "I would like that too." She reached for his hand, and he took it, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. That night, the first snow of the season began to fall. Soft flakes drifting down from a sky gone dark and heavy, covering the prairie in a blanket of white that transformed the harsh landscape into something beautiful and clean. Nate stood at the window watching the snow accumulate, his right foot responding to his commands with increasing reliability, his left beginning to show signs of waking from its long sleep. Behind him, Lily prepared for bed, already comfortable enough in their shared space to move with unself-conscious ease. The baby would arrive in 2 months, and their lives would change again, in ways they could not yet imagine. But for now, in this moment, with snow falling and hope rising and 2 broken people learning to build something whole from their combined pieces, Nate allowed himself to believe that tomorrow might indeed be better than today. His foot flexed and flexed again, and outside the snow continued its silent descent, covering everything in possibility. The next morning arrived bright and cold, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow with blinding intensity. Lily moved about the cabin with careful efficiency, her pregnancy making even simple tasks require thought and planning. Nate worked at his leather bench, hands occupied with tooling a pattern into a saddle blank. A photograph slipped from between the pages of his father's old pattern book, falling face up on the wooden floor with a soft sound that, nevertheless, caught Lily's attention. She bent to retrieve it, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and slow. The image stopped her completely. A woman, perhaps 30 years old, stood beside a boy of 6 or 7. Behind them a small frame house with a porch swing. The woman's smile was radiant, her hand resting on the boy's shoulder. The child clutched a wooden horse, his face bright with uncomplicated joy. Lily turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, "Clara and James, May 1871. She looked at the image again, studying the woman's face. There was something of Nate in her features, the same strong jaw, the same storm-blue eyes. "That is my sister," Nate said quietly. He had wheeled up behind her without her noticing, his movements silent and practiced. "Clara, and her son James. They are beautiful." They were. His voice carried a weight that made Lily look up sharply, seeing pain written across his features. "Fire took them 2 years ago. I was in Denver, performing in a Wild West show. I had promised to visit them that weekend, but the show promoter offered extra money for one more performance. I chose the money, chose the applause, chose my own glory over family." "Nathaniel," Lily's voice was soft with understanding and grief. "By the time I received the telegram, they were already buried. The fire started at night." Clara got James out, went back for her photographs and keepsakes. The house collapsed. He paused, his hands gripping the chair wheels with white-knuckle intensity. "She died trying to save things that could be replaced. Died because I was not there to stop her. To tell her that nothing in that house mattered except her life. You could not have known. I should have been there. I should have kept my promise. But I was too busy being the great Bo McKenna rodeo star, performing for strangers who forgot my name the moment I left the arena." Lily knelt beside his chair, ignoring the protest from her aching back, and took his hands in hers. She could feel them trembling. "The accident with the horse," she said, understanding blooming. 6 months after they died." Nate nodded, his jaw tight. "People said I was reckless that day. Took risks no sane rider would take. They were right. Part of me wanted that horse to win, wanted to be punished for what I had done, for what I had failed to do. But you survived. I survived. And for months I wished I had not. The paralysis felt like justice, like the punishment I deserved. And now Now I am learning that running from grief by courting death is not courage. It is cowardice." He looked at the photograph again, his expression softening slightly. Dr. Pruitt carries his war ghosts the same way. We are both trying to learn how to live with what we have lost. Lily carefully placed the photograph back in the pattern book, then returned to kneel beside him. "Then we learn together," she said firmly. "You and me and Dr. Pruitt and everyone else who carries weight they cannot put down. We learn that the past cannot be changed, but the future can be built. One day, one choice, one kept promise at a time." Nate pulled her close as her belly would allow, and held her while snow continued to fall outside, covering the prairie in white silence. The photograph of Clara and James would remain in the pattern book, a reminder not of failure, but of what mattered. Not glory or gold or the applause of strangers, but family. Connection. The promises we keep to the people we love. And Nate vowed silently but with iron certainty that he would keep every promise he made to Lily and the child she carried. He would be present. He would be worthy. He would prove that a man could be broken and still become something better than he was before. December arrived with teeth. The snow that had begun so gently in November transformed into a relentless assault of white that buried the prairie under drifts taller than a man. The temperature plummeted, turning breath to frost and making every venture outside a battle against the wind that screamed across the open land like something alive and angry. Inside the cabin, warmth and life persisted. Nate kept the fire burning day and night, feeding it with wood he had spent the previous summer stockpiling. Lily moved through the space with increasing difficulty as her pregnancy advanced, her belly now so pronounced that simple tasks required careful navigation and frequent rest. They had settled into a rhythm, a domestic partnership that felt both strange and natural. Mornings began with Nate building up the fire while Lily prepared breakfast, moving slowly around the modified kitchen that accommodated his chair height. They ate together, discussing the day's necessary tasks, the weather, the baby's increasingly vigorous movements. Afternoons found Nate at his leather work while Lily knitted or mended or simply rested, her hands cradling her belly while the baby turned and kicked within her. Evenings were reserved for conversation and shared silence, the comfortable quiet of two people who no longer felt the need to fill every moment with words. And late at night, when Lily slept, Nate continued his exercises with religious dedication. The progress was slow but undeniable. His right leg now responded with almost 70% of its former strength. He could stand for brief periods, holding on to furniture for support, bearing his own weight for 30 seconds, sometimes a full minute before his muscles gave out, and he had to sit again. The left leg lagged behind, stubbornly resistant to his efforts, but even there he could now flex his toes, rotate his ankle, generate small movements that would have seemed miraculous 6 months ago. Lily knew about the exercises now. Sometimes she watched from the bed, offering quiet encouragement when frustration threatened to overwhelm him. Other times she slept through his efforts, trusting him to fight his battles without an audience. It was during one of these midnight sessions, 3 weeks into December, that the first contraction struck. Nate was standing, balanced between the workbench and a chair, practicing weight shifts from one leg to the other. He heard Lily gasp, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the cabin silence like a blade. He turned, nearly losing his balance, and saw her sitting upright in bed, both hands pressed against her belly, her face gone pale in the firelight. "Lily?" She did not answer immediately, breathing through whatever sensation had gripped her. When it passed, she looked at him with eyes that held both excitement and fear. "I think it is time. The baby is not due for 3 more weeks. Babies come when they decide to come, not when we schedule them." Nate transferred to his wheelchair with practiced speed, rolling to her side. He pressed his hand against her belly, feeling the hardness there, the tension that indicated her uterus contracting. "How long between pains?" "That was the first, I think. We need Dr. Pruitt. Nate, it is the middle of the night, and the snow is 3 feet deep. I know, but I am getting him anyway. Nate dressed with fumbling haste, pulling on layers against the bitter cold. He maneuvered his chair to the door, then transferred to the modified seat in his buckboard. The wagon had been fitted with a canvas cover to protect against weather, and the horse, a patient mare named Patience for good reason, stood ready in the barn. The journey to town normally took 20 minutes. Tonight, in the dark and snow, it took nearly an hour. Nate drove with single-minded determination, his hands numb inside heavy gloves, his face stinging from the wind that found every gap in his coverings. Behind him, Lily waited alone, and the thought of her suffering without help drove him forward when exhaustion and cold urged him to turn back. Dr. Pruitt's house sat dark and silent when Nate finally arrived. He pounded on the door with fists that could barely feel the wood, shouting until lights appeared in the windows and the doctor emerged in nightshirt and robe, his white hair wild from sleep. "It is Lily," Nate said, his words slurred from cold. "The baby is coming." Pruitt was dressed and gathering his medical equipment within minutes, his movements sharp and efficient despite being roused from sleep. He climbed into the buckboard beside Nate, adding his own heavy coat to the coverings. "How far apart are the contractions?" he asked as they began the return journey. "I do not know. The first one hit just before I left. Then we have time. First babies are rarely in a hurry." But Pruitt's voice carried an edge of concern that belied his reassuring words. 6 weeks early was not catastrophic, but it was not ideal either. And in the Dakota winter, with the nearest hospital 2 days away by train, complications could become fatal very quickly. They found Lily where Nate had left her, sitting upright in bed, breathing through another contraction. Her face was pale but determined, her hands gripping the blankets with white-knuckled intensity. "Mrs. Cordell," Pruitt said, moving to her side with the calm authority of a man who had delivered hundreds of babies under conditions far worse than this. "Let us see what this little one has decided to do." What followed was the longest night of Nate's life. Pruitt examined Lily, confirmed she was indeed in active labor, and began preparations for delivery. Nate boiled water, gathered clean linens, tried to stay useful while fighting the helpless feeling that came from watching someone he cared about suffer pain he could do nothing to ease. Lily labored through the dark hours before dawn, her body working with ancient instinct to bring new life into the world. Pruitt coached her breathing, checked her progress, offered what comfort he could. Nate held her hand when she needed something to grip, wiped her face with cool cloths, spoke encouragement even when his own fear threatened to choke the words. As the first gray light of morning began filtering through the windows, Lily's labor intensified. The contractions came faster, harder, demanding everything she had to give. Sweat soaked her nightgown despite the cabin's chill. She cried out with each wave of pain, then gathered herself for the next. Pruitt positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his hands ready, his voice steady and sure. "Almost there, Mrs. Cordell. On the next contraction, you push everything you have." Lily bore down with strength Nate had not known she possessed, her face contorted with effort, a sound torn from deep in her chest that was half groan, half battle cry. Again Pruitt commanded, "Push." She pushed and pushed again, and suddenly the baby was there, slipping into Pruitt's waiting hands, a tiny, perfect human being covered in blood and vernix and the mystery of new life. For one terrible moment, the baby did not cry. The silence stretched, infinite and awful, while Pruitt cleared the infant's airway and rubbed its small chest. Then a sound, a gasping breath, followed by an indignant wail that filled the cabin with the most beautiful noise Nate had ever heard. "A girl," Pruitt announced, his voice thick with emotion. "A perfect, healthy girl." He cleaned the baby quickly, wrapped her in warmed blankets, and placed her in Lily's arms. The infant, impossibly small and red-faced and furious at being expelled from her warm sanctuary, continued her protests while Lily looked down at her with an expression of wonder and exhaustion and fierce protective love. "She is perfect," Lily whispered. "You are perfect. Nate wheeled closer, hardly daring to breathe as he looked at the tiny face, the miniature fingers that curled and uncurled reflexively, the dark hair plastered to her small skull. "What will you name her?" Pruitt asked as he tended to the final stages of delivery. Lily looked at Nate, and in her eyes he saw the question. This child was not his biologically, carried no part of him in her genes, but in that moment, looking at mother and daughter together, Nate felt a fierce surge of protectiveness and love that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. "Anna," Lily said softly, "after your mother." Nate felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You remembered. I remember everything you tell me." "Anna Cordell," Pruitt said, making a note in the small journal he kept for recording births. "Born December 23, 1873 at 6:47 in the morning. Weight approximately 5 pounds, length approximately 18 inches, healthy and vigorous despite early arrival." He looked up at them, his war-weary eyes softer than Nate had ever seen them. "You did beautifully, Mrs. Cordell, both of you." After Pruitt cleaned his instruments and checked both mother and baby one final time, he prepared to leave. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the world transformed into a landscape of pristine white. Sunlight sparkled off the snow with painful brightness. Nate walked him out to the buckboard, or rather, wheeled himself out. But when Pruitt turned to say goodbye, he found Nate standing beside the wagon, balanced against it for support, but standing nonetheless. "Nathaniel," Pruitt breathed, "I wanted to walk you out, properly. How long can you stand? A minute, maybe 2, not long. But you are standing, without the chair." Pruitt's hand trembled as he gripped Nate's shoulder, and Nate saw moisture in the old doctor's eyes. "I delivered 47 babies during the war," Pruitt said quietly. 23 survived. Anna is number 24, and watching you stand to see me off after everything you have overcome, perhaps I am not cursed after all. You were never cursed, Doctor. You just carried too much weight for too long, as do we all." Pruitt climbed into his wagon, but before taking up the reins, he looked back at Nate, who had transferred back to his wheelchair. "You are building something rare here, Nathaniel. A real family, forged from loss and choice rather than blood and obligation. Protect it. Cherish it. These moments of grace are precious and fleeting." After the doctor left, Nate sat in the snow for a long moment, letting the cold clear his head, steadying himself after the intensity of the night. Inside the cabin, his wife rested with their daughter, and the word "our" fit so naturally that he barely noticed using it. Our daughter, our family, our life. He wheeled back inside to find Lily dozing, Anna tucked safely in the crook of her arm. The baby slept with the absolute peace of the newly born, tiny fists curled beneath her chin, her breathing soft and even. Nate transferred to the settee, close enough to watch over them both, and allowed exhaustion to finally claim him. He slept deeply, dreamlessly, waking only when Anna's hungry cries announced that she had decided to make her presence and needs definitively known. The weeks that followed Anna's birth established new rhythms in the Cordell household. Lily recovered slowly but steadily from the delivery, her body healing while she adjusted to the constant demands of a newborn. Anna, small but healthy, proved to have inherited her mother's determination and what Lily insisted was her father Daniel's powerful lungs. Nate found himself utterly transformed by fatherhood. He had not expected the fierce, protective love that surged through him the first time Anna wrapped her tiny hand around his finger. Had not anticipated the joy he would find in the simple act of holding her while Lily rested, studying her perfect features, marveling at the completeness of this small person. He fashioned a cradle that could attach to his wheelchair, allowing him to care for Anna while moving about the cabin. He learned to change diapers with one-handed efficiency, to warm bottles while balancing the baby against his chest, to soothe her cries with soft songs he remembered from his own childhood. Lily watched these developments with quiet satisfaction, seeing in Nate's gentle care for Anna the kind of father she had hoped Daniel might become, the kind of partner she had not dared to expect when she agreed to this marriage of convenience. But as January deepened and the worst of winter settled over the territory, new concerns emerged that threatened the fragile peace they had built. The first letter arrived on a bitter cold morning, delivered by a rider from the Territorial Bank in town. Nate opened it with hands that began to shake as he read the formal language that boiled down to a simple ultimatum. Payment of $200 due within 3 months, or foreclosure proceedings would begin on the Cordell property. $200. It might as well have been $2,000. Nate's savings had been depleted by medical expenses after his accident. The farm produced enough for basic subsistence but little surplus, and with winter making fieldwork impossible and a newborn requiring constant care, their financial situation was dire. Lily read the letter over his shoulder, her face grave but not panicked. "We will find a way," she said simply. "How? I can barely keep us fed. I cannot generate that kind of money in 3 months." Then we think, we plan. We use what we have. What do we have? Your skills, my determination. 3 months. It is not impossible, Nathaniel, just difficult. That evening, after Anna had been fed and settled in her cradle, they sat at the kitchen table and took inventory.